Up again. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you happen to be in. My name is Petros Lambakis. I'm the director of the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies here at Emmanuel College in Boston. And it gives me a distinct pleasure to welcome all of you back today on our second annual George E. Danis seminar on security and diplomacy in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies started 4 years ago by hosting a number of events here in the Boston area. And the mission of the Institute is to promote and support the study of the Eastern Mediterranean and the neighboring regions by building on the liberal arts mission of Emmanuel College and leveraging the academic and innovative power of Boston. And we're going to be doing just that today and throughout the week, as we are going to be bringing together a number of experts, a number of academics, and a number of policymakers from the region, and in the attempt of really finding out about this important region that connects the East, the West, the North, and the South, and especially on a couple of issues that are very pertinent and prominent today, the issue of energy and climate. And as I was actually coming in today on the radio, on the BBC, there was the top story was how the US and Russia is getting together and having diplomatic talks over Ukraine. And at the same time, the second story was the Copernicus project in Europe and measuring the climate change over the last 7 years that Europe is experiencing a hotter climate than ever before. So it couldn't have been more topical than what we're going to be discussing this week, as we are in the beginning of a 16 session process in trying to piece together some information as far as the region is concerned. We have also with us a number of students from the region, students from Greece, Serbia, Montenegro, Romania, Bulgaria, and Cyprus. And this whole project wouldn't have been possible without the generous support of Mr. George E. Danis, who has been a big supporter of the program and a big supporter of the students who have been participating in this program over the last couple of years. We raised a lot of money for students. All of the scholarships for students that are attending, whether from Greece or outside of Greece, are supported by the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies and the support of our sponsors. And George E. Danis is in the forefront of this. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Danis to tell us a couple of words, and then we're going to shift it to Melissa Shermer, who is a student here at Emmanuel College and an intern at the Institute, and introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Dimitar Bechev, who I think it will take an hour and a half just to go over his bio, and hopefully Melissa will do a much better job than I will in doing that. So, Mr. Danis, the floor is yours. Thank you.
As soon as I get to these technological advances, good morning to all. It is a pleasure and a privilege to participate and assist Professor Lambakis on this wonderful educational and informational seminar across different continents. Technology has really assisted us to be able to communicate, whether you're in England, Greece, or Cyprus, or the United States, any part of the United States, to get together. The challenges of our future 21st century in specific are immense, and one of them is very important, is the climate problem, which really connects and intertwine with our energy consumption. And it is really a privilege to be participating with all these leaders and diplomats, professors in our seminar to really enlighten us on the region, especially from the Russia to Red Sea, all the way from Iran to Morocco, both the climate problem as well as the energy of the world's consumption. So we really wanted to thank you very much for participating, and especially the speakers and the lecturers that will give us some light, some future ideas how to combat and improve our consumption vis-a-vis the climate problem. Again, thank you very much, Professor Vakas, for spearheading this seminar and all the work that you're doing with Eastern Mediterranean Institute. Thank you, and have a great day and a great seminar.
Thank you very much. I have to say that it's not just an effort on my part. Great partnerships on collaborating institutes, as the Karamandis Chair at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and a good friend and colleague, Dr. Arvanitopoulos, the EDIS program of Pantheon University in Greece, and the American University of Greece, and Dr. Konstantinos Filis, Adonia Kolibasanu from the National University of Romania are also partners in all of this. And of course, all the staff here at the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies. So this is not a one individual effort. It's a collection of people, and I'm very, very happy to be that bridge. And
please forgive me, my dear friend Ranitopoulos, and the whole team across the globe. I don't want to take the thunder out of Professor Vakas of the specific and detailed introduction. Thank you.
No, not at all. You gave me the chance to do just that. It was my remissing. So, Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Shermer, and I would like to welcome you to the Winter 2022 George E. Danis Eastern Mediterranean Security and Diplomacy Seminar. The Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies, in cooperation with the Konstantin G. Karamanlis Chair for Hellenic and European Studies, the American College of Greece, the Institute of International Relations of Pantheon University, and the Department of International Relations of the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration in Romania, will be hosting a one-week program of focused lectures, presentations, and panel discussions. The one-week program will bring experts from different regions in 3 sets of presentations and panel discussions aimed at assessing the energy and climate challenges in the dynamic Eastern Mediterranean and neighboring regions. This seminar will address the multifaceted intersectional issues that explain the significance of the Eastern Mediterranean in regional, trans-regional, and global terms by considering issues such as climate change, migration, energy resources, and security in relation to geopolitical challenges and inter- and intra-state relations. With country experts from cases across the Mediterranean basin, the Middle East, and the transatlantic space. The seminar will introduce students to the historically grounded significance of the Eastern Mediterranean for contemporary US, foreign, and security policy, and for key global trends in the 21st century. Our presenters this week come from different countries of the region and all possess various backgrounds. This week, we will hear from a mixture of policymakers, diplomats, and academics. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing the facilitator for today's presentation, Dr. Petros Vivakis. Dr. Vivakis is a professor of political science at Emmanuel College, and he is the director of the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies. Now, allow me to introduce our presenter. Dr. Dimitar Bechev is a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's European Center and the director of the European Policy Institute, which is a think tank based in Sofia, Bulgaria. Dr. Bechev has been published extensively regarding EU foreign relations, the politics of Turkey and the Balkans, Russian foreign policy, and energy security. He has held research and teaching positions at Oxford and Hitotsubashi University in Tokyo, as well as visiting fellowships at Harvard and the London School of Economics. He was also the head of the European Council on Foreign Relations office in Sofia. Dr. Bechev is a frequent contributor to Foreign Policy, Al Jazeera Online, Oxford Analytica, Politico, and the EU Observer. His quotes have appeared in leading newspapers such as the Financial Times, The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. He also holds a doctorate of philosophy and international relations from the University of Oxford. Before turning the microphone over to our speaker, I would like to let everyone know that I will be acting as the host of this event and will guide the Q&A, which will follow the 30 to 45-minute presentation, and the duration of our program will be approximately an hour and 30 minutes. I would like to ask everyone to turn off their microphones and to either use the chat or raise hand function for any questions. We will try to answer all questions at the end. It is nice to have everyone here, and we hope that you enjoy the productive presentation and discussion. And with that, I yield the floor to you, Dr. Bechev.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's a real pleasure to be part of the event. I've cooperated with Professor Van Bergas in the past, and it's been always a stimulating exchange. I miss my days when I was based in Boston and had a chance to see all of you, or at least some of you, face to face and interact with students. But at least in this COVID days of the pandemic, Zoom brings us together for better or worse. The brief I'm given for this keynote presentation is to just offer you a few thoughts about the Russian-Turkish relationship. Some of you who have listened to me speak before surely probably have the sense of a déjà vu. We've discussed this relationship in the past, including at the Manual, which was a great event several years back. But I'll try to keep your interest and try to say something original, at least reflect on what has happened in the intervening years since I had the pleasure to be physically present there. I'm really pleased to be given this opportunity also because I have a new book coming up in late February, and I'll probably try to play out some of the themes in the book. The book itself is not about Russia-Turkey in particular. It's more, it has to do with the evolution of Turkey since really the early 90s. It's called Turkey under Erdogan, and it's going to be published with Yale University Press. And I'm really honored that there's already a contract for the Greek translation, so it will be appearing in Greece as well in due course, and hopefully in other countries. My task there was to really explore the domestic evolution in Turkey, all the kind of hopes we had as a scholarly community, but also experts and practitioners 20 years ago, and why is it that Turkey evolved the way it did. And there's quite a bit about Turkey as a foreign policy actor in the Middle East, in the post-Soviet space, in the Balkans, and of course in the Eastern Mediterranean. Some of you who are interested in Cyprus, in the Eastern Med, in Greek-Turkish relations, will have some passages and bits of chapters looking at this aspect of Turkish foreign policy. But back to Turkey-Russia. Back in the day, that was a bit of a specialist subject. There was an expert community discussing events in the Black Sea, Turkish response to the Russia-Georgia war, but it was not a big discussion making headlines in the media. That really changed one fine day in November 2015. Many of you surely remember how a Russian fighter jet veered into Turkish airspace for about 9 seconds or so. But it resulted in the Turkish Air Force being scrambled, and ultimately the jet was downed. The two pilots sadly lost their lives in the aftermath of the shooting. What ensued was nothing short of an undeclared war between Russia and Turkey. There were economic sanctions hampering Turkish economy. There was information wall, Turkey being portrayed as an ally of ISIS in Syria. Of course, there were other measures, and Russia also undertook a campaign against Turkish allies on the ground in northern Syria. And back in the day, we're talking about early 2016, 2015, by now ancient history, people were speculating about the imminence of a big, major large-scale conflict between those two major states in Eurasia, that Syria would be the trigger of an all-out confrontation, seeing a repeat of history again since the 16th century all the way to the First World War. Russia, or the Tsarist Empire and the Ottoman Empire, Turkey's predecessor, were involved in many conflicts. I think more than 12, 13 wars altogether. And there was a severe fear that now we have another episode of a major showdown, which would have implications for regional security, but also probably for NATO as well, in as much as Turkey is a pivotal member of NATO. From there, all of a sudden, there was this U-turn in the summer of 2016. We saw Russia and Turkey cooperating on Syria, but also on other issues. They emerged as something of a tandem in international politics, with Putin and Erdogan meeting on a regular basis and discussing energy cooperation, defense deals, the famous S-400 purchase that I'll come back to later in the talk. They spearheaded various energy deals as well, and the commentariats went into the other direction, speculating about the emergence of a Turkish-Russian axis, a new alliance in this part of the world, which is anti-Western. It's based on common ideology, those two authoritarian leaders joining forces together, and it's really directed against America. And that was a major change because, again, Turkey was such a pivotal country during the Cold War in America's grand strategy, aimed at deterring the Soviet Union and containing the Soviet Union, and all of a sudden a shift of axis. Now, for those who have maybe read some of the bits and pieces I've written about the relationship or listened to me, they know that I'm very skeptical of this view. In fact, and it's a theme that I'll explore in the talk, the Russian-Turkish relationship is shades of gray. It combines elements of rivalry, of competition, with overlapping interests and cooperation. That's what it makes it fascinating to me and to fellow policy analysts to unpick it and to figure out what makes it tick as a relationship. But sometimes it doesn't yield itself easily to catchphrases. People have used marriage of convenience, competitive rivalry. The talk itself echoes a paper we published with the EU Institute for Security Studies called Fire and Ice. But again, it's a pendulum effect, and at any given moment and any given issue, you have both elements of competition and cooperation, which of course might be the norm these days about international affairs in general, nothing specific about Turkey and Russia, but it's worth exploring a bit more depth how it works in this particular case. So let me cover several issues in the talk, just to give you a roadmap what I want to do before we open for Q&A, and I hope for an engaging discussion and looking forward to your questions. First, I want to say a few words about how we got there, what is the prehistory of the relationship. Very briefly, of course, I won't bore you with lots of details, dates, and names, because it's, as I said, there's a long shadow of the past, and it's worth one or more books to be written about it. Second, I want to look more systematically at the drivers of the relationship, mostly looking at what brings Russia and Turkey, despite all differences, together. And lastly, I'll explore several case studies, starting with the Middle East, because it's been the main arena of interaction between the two. I'll look also at the issue of energy, the energy relationship, because I realize that's a big theme of the workshop. How those two interact, especially in the gas trade. Then I want to say a few words about the Balkans, courtesy to Vesco, who invited me, but also I know Professor Van Bakas is interested, how Russia and Turkey do business in the Balkans and how they stand, of course, to the West. There's always the elephant in the room in my talk. What does it mean for the US and for the EU that you have Turkey and Russia joining forces on a regular basis? And lastly, I want to say perhaps a few words before I close about the post-Soviet space. We've seen the crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh in the fall of 2020, which of course grabbed quite a few headlines, and it was an important development in this region, and it elucidated, at least to me, some interesting aspects of the relationship between Moscow and Ankara. So the prehistory. What we see by way of Russian-Turkish cooperation is not unique. People are very often fixated on the Cold War, where, of course, like I said, Turkey was a key part of the containment strategy. But if you go a bit further back in time to the interwar period, you'd see that the modern Turkish Republic, when it emerged in the War of Independence in the 2020s, actually was an ally of Leninist Russia. It received support. It had a common enemy because Turkey was exposed to foreign intervention, and both, maybe for pragmatic reasons, did join forces. In many respects, even the Kemalist regime in the 20s and the 30s took or borrowed some aspects from the governance model developed by the Bolsheviks. It was not a communist regime, of course, but it was an authoritarian regime. And it got some inspiration, for instance, in the field of economy, the centrality of the state as a driver of modernization, but also externally. Turkey and Russia continued to work side by side in the 1930s, when Turkey was trying to stay out of the Second World War and not to engage with either camp. The Soviet Union was one key interlocutor throughout, with Turkey interacting with it. For the Russians, Soviets at the time, during the war in the 1940s, it was especially important that Turkey remained neutral until the very end. Turkey didn't join the war effort until 1945, when it went to the winning side. There was this whole pragmatic undercurrent in Turkish diplomacy, but it didn't bandwagon with the Nazis, and also it kept the Straits, the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles closed for the German Navy, which is a theme that we'll come back to closer to the modern era. It was only after the war when Turkey saw the Soviet Union as a greater threat, not least because Stalin had some clear and unpalatable demands to Ankara, that it went to the Western alliance, and that was important also domestically in Turkey, because it was a factor contributing to democratization, the end of the one-party regime. But really the 1950s was the exception. It was when Turkey was really in the Western camp, engaged not just in NATO, not just in the Korean War before joining the alliance, but also in all the other mechanisms developed in the US leadership to contain the Soviets and to wage the global Cold War. There was CENTO, the Baghdad Pact, and the like. Turkey was always there. So from the 1960s, though, and the 1970s, you see a Turkey that develops sort of love-hate relationship with the US. When people speculate about anti-Americanism in Turkey, that's nothing new, and the Cyprus issue was clearly one contributing factor. But as a result, from the 1960s, Turkey started engaging with the Soviets. on a more systematic basis, receiving foreign assistance, receiving Soviet specialists in key areas. Soviet expertise was crucial for Turkey to develop certain industrial sectors, for example, the aluminium business in Turkey. And again, this happens in the context of an economy which had to yet undergo a wave of liberalization. It was still in the future in the 1980s. So state planning, interventionism in the economy was very much part of the Turkish system, and therefore it was easy to interact with the Soviets. So Turkey was never an enthusiastic Cold Warrior, at least not in the later stages of the Cold War. Even with the military junta in the 1980s, which saw the clampdown against the Turkish left. And of course, the left was always suspected being on the payroll of Moscow for the Turkish security and political establishment, at least. Even in those days, the aftermath of the coup and the advent of Özal saw actually another wave of engagement. So Turkey in 1984 signed the first gas contract with the Soviet Union, and 4 years later Soviet gas deliveries started. And it's, as we shall see later in the talk, one of the backbones of the relationship, the economic interdependence that grew out of energy compatibility, Turkey being a rapidly developing industrial country, lacking its own energy resources, and having the Soviet Union energy-rich, energy-exporting country next door. And that's something that starts in the Cold War, actually. So when we saw in the post-Cold War era this blossoming of the economic relationship or political relationship, it's not that it was unprecedented. Some bits and bobs were already there. It was nothing new. There was the memory of the early republic. There was the memory of economic cooperation during the Cold War. There were all kinds of connections already in place. And of course, if you turn the perspective for the Soviets, cooperating with Turkey under different governments was a heaven sent, because then, like now, prizing important country at the crossroads of Eurasia and the Middle East and the Balkans away from the West was a win for the Soviet strategy, to the extent it was working to gain advantage against the West in the time of competition. So there's some recurrence there. There's some echoes in the present. So what happens, though, a very interesting moment, so the time of transition was the 1990s. I'm getting through my historical excursion, but it's worth kind of revisiting some of the milestones. In the 1990s, if you open any policy magazine or whatever the pundits used to say at the time, it appeared as if Turkey would fill in the vacuum left in Central Asia and the Caucasus by the Soviet demise. Russia was weak, the Soviet Empire had collapsed, and there was Turkey on the ascendant, economically vibrant country under Özal, reconnecting some aspects of its Islamic identity, squarely into the Western camp, because Özal clearly saw Turkey as an ally, as a bastion of the West, and Russia was weakened, and Turkey could fill in the vacuum. Of course, for the US, Turkey was much preferable. The famous Turkish model we have debated in various moments of the political history of Turkey was very fashionable, and if Uzbekistan or Azerbaijan was to develop and embrace its traditions and history, much better to have the version of political system and the way Islam operated that Turkey put forward than the Iranian model or the Salafist model coming from the Gulf. So Turkey was very much on offer, and it was very active in Central Asia. So much so that parts of the Soviet or the Russian establishment saw Turkey as a problem. There was no love lost between the Yeltsin administration and the Turks. There was the time of the war in Chechnya, where actually the numerous old Caucasian diaspora in Turkey, going back decades and centuries, was mobilized over Chechnya and the fight for independence, like about 1994, 96. There was Turkey trying to build alternative routes, energy supplies, bypassing Russia. It appeared to Moscow that Turkey is meddling in its own backyard and trying to gain advantage from Russia, from its weakness, and trying to open the door to US disrespecting Russia's traditional sphere of influence. Again, something that has been in the news now, this recurrent preoccupation about Russia's sphere of influence. But likewise, Turkey felt vulnerable because after Özal died in 1993, we had a series of weak governments. Turkey lost much of its vigor, and also there was the resurgence of the Kurdish issue. And historically, Turkey saw the Kurds as fifth column, exploited by external powers, and Russia could serve or could instrumentalize the Kurdish issue as an instrument to weaken Turkey from within. The Turkish military top brass had this idea of Turkey being surrounded by enemies, the axis surrounding Turkey, which included Greece, included Syria under Hafez al-Assad, the PKK, Armenia, of course, and Russia was part of this equation. It's not that everyone in Russia, of course, there was kind of liberal era in Russia. It's not that there was this opinion that everybody shared that Turkey is a problem, is an enemy. But there were elements in the Russian state machine that saw Turkey with a great deal of suspicion. Those of you who follow East Mediterranean affairs surely remember the crisis around the S-300s that Russia was selling to the Republic of Cyprus, and Turkish reaction, as well as the compromise that emerged with American mediation to resolve the crisis in 1998. So in the 1990s, things could go either way, but certainly a lot of people saw the beginning of a Turkish-Russian confrontation, that Turkey would be pushing into the Soviet backyard, the former Soviet Empire, Russia's backyard, and Russia will try to strike back at Turkey. Now, what happened really, and that's before we get to Erdogan and Putin, was a gradual sort of accommodation. Well, those two powers learned to live side by side. They discovered the benefits of cooperating economically. In 1997, Turkey and Russia signed the deal to build a new pipeline under the Black Sea, what would become eventually Blue Stream. It didn't come online until 2005, but also the project itself was interesting because it involved supplying Ankara and the eastern part of Turkey with Russian gas. It strengthened economic interdependence, but also it involved European companies. So Italy, the Italian national champion was part of the deal. That's why when it was inaugurated, you also saw Silvio Berlusconi. So in other words, the win-win mentality that there'll be trade and economic benefits of working together. became much more central to the understanding of the relationship. We're talking about the late 90s. Something else happened as well. Russia refused to grant political asylum to Abdullah Öcalan when he escaped from Syria and sought refuge in a number of countries. At some point, early 1999, he ended up in Moscow. The then Duma, which had a nationalist bent, tried to embarrass Yeltsin and Primakov and push for asylum, but then the Russian leadership said no. So that was a clear sign to the Turks that Russia would be respectful vis-a-vis the red lines Turkish national security establishment had on the Kurdish issue. And then Turkey reciprocated. It's forgotten that by now it's ancient history, another episode. The first Turkish leader to meet Putin was Prime Minister Bülent Ecevit, who went to Moscow in November 1999. That was the height of the Second Chechen War, and Ecevit famously said that that's Russia's internal business. He said Turkey has no part in this game. I don't know to what extent he was sincere, but it was a bold political statement because he faced a lot of criticism, including from the then Virtue Party, that basically the Islamists were deposed in '97 and they were in opposition, but they tried to use the Chechen issue to embarrass the then coalition government under Ecevit. But that was a very pragmatic, hard-nosed decision to signal back to the Russians that Turkey was not a disruptive power and was respectful of the concerns of the Russian side. So if you put together the economy and the security accommodation on both sides, the Kurdish issue and the Chechen issue, you see the making of this relationship already before Putin Erdogan took office, before the early 2000s. So let me stop here with the history, but just highlight that some of those themes, overlapping security interests, shared ideological preferences at times, but also economic interdependence, are still present and drive the relationship forward. But also to underscore that competition and cooperation were already part of the mix in this early era. And again, those of us who follow Turkey sometimes joke that we are back into the 1990s. Some of the things that we thought we've left behind are coming back when it comes to domestic and to some degree foreign policy in Turkey. And the 1990s are still with us when it comes to Russia, Turkey, I suppose. Now, let's go over the drivers and think about what is it that made Russia and Turkey cooperate. I mean, it's very clear why they should compete. I won't dwell on that. History, clash of geopolitical interests. But why is it that those two are able to work and to do business together? Many people tend to go for an explanation which highlights leaders. So it's basically Putin and Erdogan taking charge. They're both strong men. They've been around for quite a while. They have concerns about the West. They fear that the West is fomenting regime change, but also they sort of trust one another. They know that if they agree on something, the other party tends to deliver. So those strongman argument is the first cut one, the first cut explanation why Turkey and Russia have moved so close over the past decade or so, despite Syria, and why in 2016, such a sharp U-turn was possible. There's some value in this explanation. I'm not there to dismiss it. For those who know how decision-making operates in both Ankara and Moscow, it's very hard to dismiss the strongman argument. I think, however, that it has some limits. It doesn't explain for sure why those trends were underway even before those took charge, say in the 1990s. And the two leaders certainly saw the trend and accelerated and smoothened some of the disagreements. But there are structural things happening. It's not that Putin Erdogan started from zero, quite the opposite. So that's the problem with the strongman argument. A version of a strongman argument looks at the domestic system. So we are moving from personality to the features of the domestic regimes, and they'll say, look, we have an authoritarian system in Russia where democracy never took hold. And then Turkey and Erdogan actually evolved into this authoritarian polity. For them, both of them, the West is threatening, and therefore, because of ideological reasons, they cooperate as fellow authoritarians. They belong to a league of autocratic countries, and that's the glue that brings them together. Well, certainly there's some merit there, but that's actually the argument I like the least. Not because it glosses over the important differences in the two systems. Turkey has a much longer democratic tradition than Russia, and has a history of competitive elections. Political participation is very high in Turkey still to this day. Elections matter, and you saw the opposition winning Istanbul and Ankara in 2019. And also political parties matter in the way that the loyal opposition in Russia doesn't. In fact, you can foresee a scenario where actually Erdogan leaves power. It's not that it's not a done deal, but this is the tenor of the discussion in Turkey these days, that if the elections are fair in 2023, there will be a change of guard in Ankara, and that's not the case in Russia. So these are not two different, same systems. I mean, Russia is an autocracy, Turkey is something what scholars call competitive authoritarian system. And if Erdogan is gone, it probably will revert back to the kind of dysfunctional democracy we're accustomed to see in Turkey. That's a theme in my book, for sure. But more importantly, the domestic argument doesn't explain how it is exactly that features of the domestic regime translate into foreign policy alignments. It's much more easy to see how personalities bear on particular decisions, whether to work with Russia or to oppose Russia, whether to buy S-400s. But it's not the case when you look at kind of broader phenomena or institutional facts about elections, civil society, political participation. That's why this is the fact that this is the argument I like. I'm not very fond of that. Turkey is authoritarian, therefore it likes Russia. Also, I mean, authoritarian Turkey, as we saw, I'll get to this point eventually, pushed back against Russia on several occasions. 2 years ago in Idlib, in Syria, but also in Libya and Karabakh. So Turkey actually, under a strong leader and the authoritarian system with no checks and balances, it made the use of force even more problemless, made Turkey more gung-ho on foreign policy issues, which, amongst other things, resulted in a willingness to take risks vis-a-vis Russia. So it cuts both ways, the whole authoritarian argument. Now, there is the economic interdependence argument that Turkey and Russia have worked together because basically they see their interests aligned. It's difficult to disentangle them because of the tourism sector, because of trade in energy, and therefore at least for Turkey, it makes sense to accommodate Russia and to be on the good books with Russia, not to push back against it. And there's some value in it. For instance, when Russia annexed Crimea, which was something going against Turkish national interest, and Turkey has been very vocal ever since opposing the annexation. Turkey actually was one of the countries that refused to impose sanctions against the Russians. But then again, economic interdependence, they have very often have been also a weapon. That's something Russia instrumentalized very cleverly to impose damages on Turkey, especially in the aftermath of the jet incident in Syria. So of course it's something that creates common interest, but also it's something that results in vulnerability. So that's something ambiguous about it. One argument I think it's worth noting, and that's the last driver to highlight, are the changes in geopolitics. So the balance of power at the global and at the regional level. Of course, it's a crude explanation. It's sometimes difficult to underscore, to find out, to tease out the causal mechanisms. But there's a lot, at least in my mind, that goes in favor. So I think ultimately, just to put my cards on the table, the combination between leadership and structural change explains why Russia and Turkey have been on the same page. On the global level, the end of the Cold War, the end of the Soviet threat diminished the value of the Atlantic alliance for Turkey, Russia becoming less of a threat. So Turkish foreign policy was freed, and that created space for them to engage with Russia. And likewise for the Russians, there was a moment of exploration, of finding a new role, and Turkey ultimately turned out to be, in this multipolar setting that emerged in Eurasia, a partner as much as a rival. But also, I think more importantly, if you look at the regional level, and they are mostly mean the Middle East, the end of the Cold War, and especially the kind of post, the other major geopolitical thresholds, the kind of American intervention period after 9/11, it changed Turkish calculus. So from an ally, the US became a challenge. I mean, of course, it's a very important relationship for Turkey. Turkey depends on security guarantees extended by Washington, depends on military cooperation, on defense cooperation, and what have you. But geopolitically, lots of people in Turkey across the spectrum started questioning America's role, seeing it as a disruptive power. The fate of Iraq and the emergence of the Kurdish entity, feeding into the most deeply ingrained fears of separatism, of secessionism in Turkey. America seemed to be accommodating all those tendencies, making Turkey's life worse by behaving the way it did under the Bush administration. So that led to a recalibration of Turkish strategic thinking in the 2000s. And it got even worse with the Arab Spring, I think. Ultimately, Turkey, there was a moment in time when it seemed as if Turkey will have America on its side, intervening against Bashar al-Assad, the Red Lines incident in 2013, but eventually was left alone to fend for itself. And I'm not saying this is an objective fact. This is how Turkish foreign policy and political elites think about the situation. So there is this grudge against the US that grew over time. It was there with the secular establishment, with the military, but eventually caught up also with the AKP, which I guess remember was so much pro-American in its early incarnation. And that eventually translated into working with Russia side by side. So when you push Turks why Turkey finds itself in the same boat with Russia, they argue it has no other choice. It's just America is not there, it's not reliable. Of course, it's more complicated because Turkey has been dancing between the two poles. It's not an ally of Russia, but there's a certain element of truth in that. So the waning of, in other words, of the waning of the Turkish-American connection is contributed to Turkey moving closer to Russia, with all the caveats in that. So if you put all those 4 or 5 factors together, Erdogan and Putin, combined with the new geopolitical realities at the regional and the global level, probably tell you something about why this duo has emerged and has become such a prominent feature in politics. So now let me move to the third part of my talk, which is about regional dynamics, or the 4 case studies. The first one, the Middle East, kind of flows naturally from what I had to say before. I mean, initially Russia and Turkey saw each other as adults in the region. Again, Turkey was a major proponent of the kind of changes spearheaded by the Arab Spring. Russia, on the other hand, saw it as a problem because it was it put on display regime change and exacerbated fears in the Kremlin that the US and the West in general is using popular concerns to promote the downfall of incumbent governments. So what happened in Cairo, what happened with Gaddafi especially, could easily be replicated in the post-Soviet space, and why not in Russia? So those two saw each other on the opposite side of the barricade in Middle Eastern affairs. But eventually, Turkey, their positions converged, and that's interesting how it happened. Because the issue came to a head in Syria, because for Syria has been and was at the beginning of the war and the crisis essential for Turkey, being next door and having such an impact in terms of security spillover, economic consequences, and so forth. The moment Russia moved into the Syrian conflict to tip the balance in favor of the regime, Turkey was forced with a dilemma. Ultimately, Russia imposed such a cost on Turkey with its coercive campaign, or campaign of soft coercion, that Turkey had no other choice but to change its preferences in Syria. From regime change, it focused on the Kurdish insurgency and essentially calculated that it's much better to work with Russia to gain some leverage in Syria rather than try to push back against the Russians. And the rest is history. That's the Astana process, Turkey intervening several times in northwest Syria, then in northeast Syria, carving out those zones of influence with the blessing of Putin, Erdogan and Putin negotiating, but also actually giving Russia free hand elsewhere in Syria to help the regime reconquer parts of it. So for all intents and purposes, Syria became something of a condominium. Of course, Iranians are also involved. And Russia and Turkey learned how to live side by side and to accommodate each other on the ground as well, which is a remarkable turnaround. Something similar probably happened in Libya with the war, although there are important differences in Libya, of course, in the sense that Russia is officially not present there. There is no Russian intervention. Russian mercenaries are there, probably some security personnel, but there's no military operation. In fact, it's the opposite. In Libya, arguably, Turkey is playing the same role as Russia in Syria. It has the same sort of military operation on the invitation of the Tripoli government, uses some of the same tools, mercenaries, air power to dictate events on the ground and to gain some diplomatic leverage or political process. And the other difference, of course, is that Russia, when it comes to the east of Libya, is part of a bigger coalition, which involves the United Arab Emirates, it involves Egypt, Saudi Arabia to some degree, and implicitly some European countries as well. So when a lot of people were considering the replication of the Astana format, where Russia and Turkey will be forming this political committee to diplomatically steer the processes, that's not feasible, and won't happen because Russia is not as invested in Libya as it is in Syria. In fact, Turkey is much more invested than the Russians. But there was a proxy battle because in late 2019, early 2020, Russia clearly sided with Haftar's forces in the offensive against Tripoli, and Turkey helped the other side to win this battle. But then again, Russia stopped the Turkish advance, entrenching itself in the center of the country, and with help from the UAE, of course. But it's the same dynamic of competing, then negotiating, and then using proxies and trying to forge out some geopolitical deal which guarantees economic and political interests of both. It's just that the Russian involvement in Libya is much lighter than what you have in Syria. Both conflicts are unresolved despite the kind of violence being dialed down in both, but they can re-emerge, putting Russia and Turkey on a war footing, and then the leadership has to manage escalation to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. Final thing about the Middle East I want to say, and I understand that Libya and Syria is just one fragment of the region. There's much more to be said, and maybe in the Q&A we'll go there, but just for the sake of time, I won't spread further, is to reflect a bit on the Idlib situation in early 2020. It was a remarkable episode because you saw for the first time the Russian forces firing against the Turkish army. You had 34, later 35 servicemen losing their lives because of a Russian airstrike. Then Erdogan decided not to blame the Russians, but to put the blame on the Assad regime, which was a clever move just to allow some space for negotiation. Russia thought that they could basically push Turkey there and leave its presence only in a very narrow border zone. But Turkey managed to escalate and impose calls on the Russians, pushing very hard back against the Russian advancement. And ultimately, after weeks of not taking the phone calls by Erdogan, Putin agreed to sit down and update the deal. That was in March 2020. And ultimately, the status quo that we see now is the product of this new deal, where actually they carved out the territory, established a new regime concerning the highway, joint patrols, and so on and so forth. I need not get into the details. But again, they switched from fighting through proxy, or even directly, to actually talking. And this time it was dangerous because the fight could escalate into something nastier, but they managed to de-escalate pretty skillfully. That's an open question, just as a footnote, whether this is sustainable. We see new bomb attacks, bomb raids in the Idlib area, just next door to Turkey, with huge implication for refugee pressure on Turkey at a difficult time. Whether this arrangement is sustainable, we shall see, but it held for quite some time, which is a testament that despite all the pressure on Russia-Turkey, they managed to find out some sort of a compromise there. But it's the same logic of fighting, then negotiating, then fighting, but trying to manage the conflict as much as possible. Now I'll move to energy. Turkey is dependent on Russian gas. Russia is the largest supplier to Turkey, but then again, Turkey has done a relatively good job in diversifying supplies. First, because of Azerbaijan, and because of the presence, the southern gas corridor coming online, and Greece is part of the southern gas corridor as well. But also because of the surge of LNG, including from the US, on the market. So Turkey has more options now. And when its contracts will be expiring in the next couple of years, between 2022 and 25, there's the contract for Turkstream, the pipeline Turkey built together with Russia after 2014, and the contract for the Blue Stream. The Turkish National Gas Company will have some leverage to dictate the commercial conditions with Russia. In fact, Turkey finds itself in the same place as many big European consumer countries. It has the interest of dictating the terms, for instance, the take-or-pay clauses to diversify supplies. Then Russia is doing its best to keep market share in Turkey and also to have the contract shaped on its own terms. Russia right now is in a very good position because of the gas shortages. It's increasing its sales to Turkey because of Turkstream that offered a very good price that Azeris and LNG providers cannot beat. And this is a sweetener, I think, in the run-up to those commercial negotiations. It's not out of a good heart, though, because Putin likes everyone that a good price is offered to the Turks compared to other consumers in Europe. Russia will be will try to perpetuate dependence to squeeze out good economic terms, but also to use it as a diplomatic tool to keep Turkey on site there. So this is something to watch. Turkey is also building a nuclear power plant, which is the first one in Turkey with Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear company. And one consequence of the jet crisis in 2016 is that for a long time there was a back and forth, very dense, very difficult negotiation about the commercial terms, the small print on, for instance, how much Turkish side will be paying for the electricity from the nuclear power plant. Turkey was dragging its feet, driving a hard bargain on the nuclear power plant. After the reconciliation, when Putin came to Istanbul in October 2016, Turkey had to make a lot of concessions, both on Turkstream but also on the nuclear power plant to accommodate Russia. So that was the payment, if you will, back to the Russians for actually receiving Erdogan back. So in energy, there's the business logic, there's also the political logic. Turkey will probably continue with its best effort to reduce the role of Russian gas. Russian nuclear is, by the way, one of the ways to reduce the role of Russian gas, but it won't be easy, and Russia has some cards to play, definitely. And Turkey is a big market for Russian gas. There have been years when it was the second largest after Germany. I'm not sure about the statistics right now, but it's in the top 3 or top 4 in Europe. And proximity to Russia makes shipping of gas pretty straightforward to Turkey as well. So this relationship is bound to continue. It also creates this balance because Turkey cannot offset the imports of gas with exports to Russia. So there's always a trade deficit. The Turkish construction is active in Russia. There's agricultural trade, but since the 1990s, the deficit in trade has been a sticking point in this relationship. But overall, much more harmonious than what you see in the Middle East, where the stakes are much higher. Now, briefly, let's move to the Balkans. And in the Balkans, many of you are probably aware, there's this whole conversation about the West being absent, EU integration blocked, US not as interested as in the old days, and as a result, those external powers, Russia, Turkey, and China filling in the gap. And there is, of course, much truth to that. You've seen a lot of local players, whether it's on economic deals, whether it's on diplomacy and security, reaching out to the Chinese, to the Russians, to the Turks, Erdogan going to the region on a regular basis, Putin occasionally being in Belgrade, also in the information space, those trying to challenge the West. But I still think that Turkey and Russia find themselves in different positions for two reasons. Sorry. First one is that Russia is an external power. I don't think Turkey is an external power. It has part of the region. It has all kinds of connections. About 30% of Turkish population comes from the Balkans. Turkey trades with the region much more actively, including with new members, Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece. And there is a clear historical connection. So it's not, Turkey is not an external power the way Russia is, and certainly it's not comparable to China. So that's a bit unfair. That's number one. Number two, and I've written an article for the Journal for Southeast European and Balkan, Southeast European and Black Sea Studies, based in Athens, looking at Turkish role in the Balkans. Turkey has not given up on the West. It has its own policy. It sometimes clashes with that of EU and the US, but it's not radically at odds. So Russia is a spoiler trying to block enlargement. Turkey, on the other hand, has not obstructed NATO's enlargement to Montenegro and then North Macedonia, and Vesko here can probably tell us more about the minutiae of those processes, especially the Montenegrin case. It has ratified the treaties. It has behaved pretty much in the same way that it was behaving in the past, when it was much more squarely in the Western camp. So it's a different policy from the one pursued by Russia. One of the similarities is the use of identity arguments. So if the West tries to not exploit the various cleavages between ethnicities, religious communities, and bring them together, heal the wounds of conflicts as Kosovo and Bosnia. Turkey and Russia have sectarian policy. Turkey caters to the Muslims. Erdogan styles himself as the leader of all Muslims in Europe, tries to use this as domestic leverage as well. Also, Turkey wages a campaign against the Gulenists in the region. So Islam is a central part of Turkish policy. The same way that Orthodox Christianity has been one of the leverages, not the only one, but certainly an important one for Russian identity. Although I must say that Russia is much more flexible, it can do business with pretty much everyone, irrespective of their ethnicity or religion. But there is a clear parallel between the two. So on the surface, yeah, you see that, but I still believe that Turkey hasn't given up on the West in the Balkans. It has bandwagon with many of the policies, despite everything. You have, for instance, Turkish troops still in NATO's KFOR operation in Kosovo. Turkey also contributes to EU4, Althea, and in Bosnia. And I don't see that much Turkey and Russia ganging up against the West there, although it will be a bit rich to say that Turkey is a partner of the West in the old days. I mean, Erdogan certainly doesn't see it that way. So that's about Balkans. Finally, Black Sea, the post-Soviet region, we definitely saw a much more assertive Turkey in Nagorno-Karabakh, which probably was not what Russia expected. Turkey weighed on the side of Azerbaijan in 2020 and helped the Azeris score a victory against Armenia, which of course is an ally of Russia. And it was probably embarrassing, at least initially, for the Kremlin to see Turkey venturing into what Russia considers its own turf and dictating some geopolitical major shifts on the ground, changing the facts on the ground as well, helping Azerbaijan reconquer those 6 districts around Nagorno-Karabakh. Then again, if you look at the outcome of the crisis, it's not that Russia emerged empty-handed. In fact, there is an argument to be made that Russia reacted flexibly and actually got more than Turkey out of it. It became the guarantor of the geopolitical deal, which was signed in Moscow. It was not signed in Ankara. There are Russian peacekeepers now in Azerbaijan, after Azerbaijan made sure that there was no Russian military presence. That was one of the only frozen conflicts that remained without Russian direct military involvement in the post-Soviet space, but now Russian troops are there as well as peacekeepers. And Armenia is even more dependent on Russia than in the past because it's even more vulnerable to Azerbaijan. So of course Turkey gained something, but Russia gained arguably even more. Now, the big question is whether Turkey will manage to instrumentalize this victory to spearhead the process of reconciliation with Armenia. There are also already the makings of a new rapprochement, but it's important to be said that if there is a deal between Yerevan and Ankara, it has to go through Russia's blessings, because Russia has so much leverage. It holds so many cards in this situation. So what we see as a thaw between Armenia and Turkey is not against Russia, it's with Russia's approval, and Russia can easily probably pull the plug should it wish. And back in 2009, for those who remember the previous effort to for Russia, for Armenia and Turkey to reconcile. Russia was not very enthusiastic and played a spoiler to some degree, although it was the Medvedev era and it was not such a priority, I guess. So in the Caucasus, Turkey is still trying to get some footholds, but it has not replaced Russia as the main power broker, despite everything and despite the success on the battlefield and the gains made by the Azeris. Russia retains a leverage also in Baku, and the Azeri government is not a client of Turkey, as is often portrayed. So it's complicated. It's also complicated in Ukraine, and that's the last thing I want to talk about, how, going back to the opening, because we mentioned the negotiations happening between the US and Russia now with regard to Ukraine and East European security. Turkey is on very good terms with the Ukrainians because of the Crimean Tatars, because of economic interests, because of positive political legacy as well. In fact, Turkey managed to sell military technology to Ukraine. Its drones were deployed on the battlefield. They kind of hit some hardware of the Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. But having said that, Turkey is not likely to align fully with Ukraine in case of a showdown, because there's some limits to what extent it's prepared to challenge Russia. As we saw in the case of the Crimean sanctions, Turkey is not willing to take too much risk. It will be using those connections to pro-Western countries like Ukraine, like Georgia, another traditional friend. Remember the old days when Turkey was on bad terms with all its neighbors, say for Georgia and Bulgaria in the 90s. Turkey will be using Azerbaijan, Georgia, Ukraine to balance Russia. It will be using also NATO as a shield against Russia, but it won't be there to fight Russia because there is this essential fear. You register with people, interviewing people in Ankara when they talk about Russia, that in case of a major confrontation, Turkey will be left alone to deal with the Russians. There won't be any NATO, there won't be any US to support it, and then the consequences will be really negative. That lingered on the back of the mind of Turkish policymakers in 2008 during the Georgian war, and that was the lesson they drew from Syria when they were exposed to the pushback from Russia in 2015, 2016. And that's their view of Black Sea security as well. So it will be competing with the Russians, but trying to keep it within certain limits. And the Russians know that. They probably watch very carefully how Turkey behaves, the alliances it builds, but they know that they also retain leverage. And if Erdogan is trying to play hardball, of course, he's now busy at home. He has other fish to fry than to fight Russia, to compete with Russia. Moscow knows it can impose very harsh costs on the Turkish government and Erdogan personally. So that's, again, another illustration of what I wanted to explore in this talk, the complex dynamics where those two important countries have learned to coexist and to do geopolitical economic business together. But also competition is always there and manifests itself in different shapes or forms. So let me stop here and open for questions.
Wow, that's great. It really illustrates how complex this relationship is. We tend to oversimplify the relationship and look at Russia and Turkey with this sort of like bad guy, good guy approach. And I think we were in for, I knew before coming in that this was like a treat. And I want to thank our mutual friend Vesco for being the person that brought you with us this morning, Dimitar. And I think everybody has gotten a treat about the complexity, not only the historical dimension that you provided, but also the geopolitical, the economic, and the energy aspects, and how they're interwoven into all of these issues that we have seen over the last 25 years, even with the Arab awakening, Arab Spring, Arab winter, however you want to term it. And what does that mean individually for these countries and throughout the region, and how complex the region is? I certainly have a number of questions, but I know we're over time as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the floor over to Melissa and to ask a couple of questions in the chat and see if those could be addressed. But I would really like to know more about this relationship as far as the energy component is concerned, and the fact you told us that Turkey has diversified and it's not as vulnerable as might have been in the 1990s when it came to the energy in the energy game. But Turkey and Russia both have different options as far as Europe is concerned, and sort of like Russia plays this driving role when it comes to European energy security, and how much of that is part of the game. But that's let's listen from the audience first. Thank you again, Dimitar.
So the first question in the chat asks, given the ongoing global structure change, US reentrenchment, and EU weakness, could the Russian-Turkish relationship evolve into a strategic one for the long term? From an international systemic aspect, can Moscow and Ankara be strategic partners regardless of historical and cultural obstacles?
Shall we collect more questions or respond them one by one?
Might as well both questions.
Okay. And as concerning the Syrian field, a potential Turkish-Iranian competition could challenge the Turkish-Russian relationship given the Russian-Iran partnership. If yes, how?
All right, these are very big questions. I mean, to be honest, I'm really skeptical that what you have between Turkey and Russia can evolve into a strategic relationship for a variety of reasons. First of all, I mean, there is no love lost for Russia in Turkey. In fact, despite all the fractures in the relationship between Ankara and Washington, you see that support for NATO is very high. It's consistently high, and it's more than 50% of Turks believe that NATO remains an essential part of Turkey. So Turkey won't leave NATO because it is clearly benefiting. It provides an extra layer of security and an extra anchor to the West, if you will, despite the disenchantment and the rise of anti-American, anti-Western discourse in Turkish society and politics. So as long as Turkey is in NATO, it's very difficult to see Turkey emerging as a partner of Russia. If Turkey was a partner, it would be the junior partner. That's the other problem. And I'm not sure how you handle that. There is not much trust between the two. It's not based on trust, on common principles or common norms. It's based on utility. And it's also reflective of a kind of lone wolf mentality in Turkey, that everyone is out there for their own. And there are no constant friends, there are no constant enemies. And therefore Russia can be a friend one day, but it doesn't mean that tomorrow it will be won't stab you in the back. And it's the same with Russia. I mean, Russia has lots of relationships. We think about the Middle East, it's friends pretty much with everyone, even in situations where you have disputes, which other countries on good terms with both Israel and the Iranians, with both Algeria and Morocco, with Turkey and all the different Kurdish players. But Russia has no permanent alliances, is not committed to anyone, is not embedded in the region, because it always entails costs. If you want to be a partner with somebody tomorrow, it means that you have to fight on their behalf or to bail them out in an economic crisis. So Russia cannot offer that much back, not just to Turkey, but pretty much to anyone else, maybe outside the Soviet space, when it probably is prepared to make sacrifices in blood or treasure. And so the partnership won't work, because Russia won't get invested and doesn't want to have its hands tied there. What we are left with is this kind of quasi-partnership, which is pretty resilient and does the job, but it won't emerge into something qualitatively different, I think. At least I don't see it happening. And God knows what happens if there's a regime change in Turkey. That's this interesting question. Probably, it's not that Erdogan is going, but if we assume that there'll be a new president in 2023, probably what we'll see is a bit of a distancing from Russia and re-engagement with the West, but not a total breakup. Russia will remain important. But no scenario presumes there'll be even deeper integration. I don't see it happening. I might be proven wrong. Yeah, Turkey, Syria, Iran. I don't know. I mean, Syria has been quite calm there, and it seems to me that Turkey at this stage has no grudge against Iran. I mean, Iran got what it wanted, keeping Bashar in power. Turkey is getting what it wanted, having all those buffer zones in Idlib. Idlib becoming a third buffer zone after Afrin, after the Euphrates Shield area, and of course now we have also the northeast Syria buffer zone, the Peace Spring one, and everybody's staying in their lane. Turkey is not pushing for the removal of the regime. Iran is not really pushing for the reconquest of those areas. There are, in fact, links between Turkey and the regime. Russia is hopeful that eventually there will be a reconciliation, and Erdogan and Bashar al-Assad will be meeting face to face. So, yeah, I mean, I don't see any flashpoint between the Iranians and Turkey right now. Of course, it's not a happy relationship. I mean, of course, the Turkish-Iranian relationship is probably comparable to what I had just to say about Russia and Turkey. It combines overlapping interests and cooperation with historically colored competition. So it's not simple. It's not easy to capture. But they know how to conduct business, and they know how to coexist and to minimize the risks. And I think Syria will be yet another example of everyone having their area of influence. And they're both there to stay. There's a difference. I mean, it's not responding to a question, but it's important to highlight that Russia can leave Syria tomorrow, and it's not really invested there. I mean, I don't think it will, but if there's a political decision in Kremlin, the costs of living and the mechanics of leaving Syria the way the US left Afghanistan won't be such a challenge. Whereas I think Iran, but also Turkey now with all those buffer zones, is there for the long haul in Syria. So they have to, same in North Iraq, they have to find a way, a modus vivendi.
Thank you. I think we'll probably have time for one more question. Where does Russia stand on Greek-Turkish differences, including Eastern Mediterranean delimitations in Cyprus? And has it shifted at all its stance as a result of the quasi-partnership with Turkey?
Yeah, that's an excellent question because, again, in the 90s, Russia appeared, for a variety of reasons, much closer to the Greek position. And of course, there's a separate conversation about Russia and Cyprus having this very dynamic and dense relationship. Now, for reasons not to do with the Eastern Med, but more broadly with Russian-Turkish relations, Russia is seen as closer to Turkey. In fact, I remember a year ago, Turkish commentators and journalists made a lot of fuss about Russia conducting exercises in the Eastern Med and trying to and calling the Turkish side for NAFTEX as a sign that Russia is changing sides there. My feeling, though, is that Russia is neutral. It won't support Greece, but it won't fight Turkey's battles there. It has no dog in the fight, and it just kind of sit out any confrontation. To the extent that Greece and Turkey cancel each other on gas exploration, on hydrocarbons, that's an outcome which is very beneficial for the Russians because there is no competitor from the Eastern Med. So I don't think Russia is as central to the conflict as it used to be before. Maybe to the extent that it has the Security Council veto and it has to say something, but it's not a central player. And despite everything, it won't be taking Turkey's side to try to just talk to both sides and try to make the most and behave opportunistically in this situation.
Thank you. We do have one more question in the chat. Do you agree that the dynamics of the Turkish-Russian partnership tend to be based on the fact that flourishing economic relations are to be kept separate from geopolitical incompatibility? Could we present the dynamics of the Turkish-Russian partnership as something of a mystery?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good question, because for a long time that was the case. They managed to compartmentalize the relationship. That was the case in the early stages of the Syrian war. We agreed to disagree on Syria. Obviously, we're on the opposite sides of the barricade. But all those commercial deals, energy, it's a separate line of business. We don't mix them together. Now, in 2016, that was all, or 2015, after the Jet incident, that was proven. I mean, that changed essentially because Russia weaponized economic interdependence and tried to exploit commercial relations to coerce Turkey into changing its policy, which it succeeded. So there is a much clearer connection between the two. There is a precedent, and it's somewhat Russia has been doing a lot in the post-Soviet space, using trade as a weapon. For example, when Moldova or Georgia does something which is seen as contrary to Russia's interests, next thing you know, there's a ban on kind of health and safety grounds, on sanitary grounds, of agricultural exports to Russia. All of a sudden, the Georgian wines don't taste right or don't have the right amount of this substance or that substance. And you've seen quite a bit of that with Turkey as well, on and off, of, say, denying also permits to Turkish workers to work on construction sites in Russia. So in the past, probably it was much easier to put them on separate boxes, but now it seems to me that Russian policy is dependent on using trade in a coercive manner. That's why for Turkey it's essential to, especially on energy, to diversify. Having said that, it's not 100% the case, because even at the height of the quasi-war in 2016, it's not that Russia stopped this delivery of gas to Turkey, right? I mean, it used other parts of the economy, but energy was kept separate because it's just simply too profitable. Turkey is too bigger markets. So they didn't escalate to turn off the tap on Turkey. It would have been counterproductive. They found other sectors to retaliate against Erdogan, not the gas trade. So the economy still matters. Economic logic, as opposed to geopolitical logic, still carries some weight, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Bechev. We're very grateful for this interesting and insightful presentation. And I would also like to thank our facilitator, Dr. Vamvakis, today for leading this great discussion, and our audience as well for being here and asking these great questions. Before ending the presentation, I'd also like to remind everyone they'll be having another discussion in approximately an hour and 15 minutes, which is 2 p.m. Boston time and 9 p.m. Athens time. Mr. Nico Safos from the Center of Strategic and International Studies will be leading a presentation. But again, thank you for being here today, and we especially thank Dr. Bechev for their time and this great discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.